To be with you, Greg. I remember that you are, I think I'm still right about this, you are the only war correspondent embedded with American troops who was actually wounded, real live wounded, on the way between Kuwait and Baghdad. And that's largely because I was with the U.S. Marines and you, a U.S. Marine, were embedded with the Army. They didn't look after you as well as the Marines looked after me.
You're right about that. That was such a wild time. And yeah, I guess if I were wearing a uniform, they would have given me a medal. But it was a very minor injury. Let's face it. What do they call it? The $1 million wound. I mean,
look at. I know that you didn't get the same message I did from our boss at the time, because when I got shot down in that helicopter and eventually got picked up and brought back, it had been several hours that I'd been, quote, MIA and in another network. And when Roger called me up on my, remember we had those Iridium satellite phones, he called me up and he said to me, he said, I sent you out there to cover the news, not be the news.
The late, great Roger Ailes, who gave us an amazing opportunity. Well, Colonel, it is fantastic to see you. Look, I want to get your take on everything. And by the way, your book, The Rifleman, I think you've had some special insight into it. And there you go. And we got an electronic version of it right here. You have special insight. This is a Revolutionary War novel, but I want to bring you to today and what's going on with the destruction of all of these statues, anything related to our history, anything that is remotely complicated, the left wants to do away with. You saw what happened in Portland. They took down that statue of George Washington. I mean, I have never really genuinely worried for our country. I always thought we would be okay. I'm genuinely worried tonight. How do you feel?
Well, Greg, I'm deeply concerned. Listen, I have 18 grandkids. Some of the youngest ones. I got one who's a college sophomore and one who's 5 months old. I'm very concerned that they won't even know that there was a Civil War. Because here in Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, where our governor is bluntly, here he is, a baby-killing, gun-grabbing, race baiter who is now tearing down every statue of every single Confederate soldier they can find. We're changing the names of all of our roads. Lee Highway is not going to be Lee Highway. Jeb Stuart Drive is no going to, the schools are changing. All of this to satisfy the far left in this country. By the way, none of that is going to make policing any better. None of that is going to stop the carnage that's been going on all over this country over the course of the last several weeks. And, in the midst of all of that, remember when the launch of the Dragon space capsule went, the president was down there to watch, standing right next to Elon Musk. Right afterwards, he gave because it's the day after the terrible tragedy that occurred up in Minneapolis. And he gave a speech that was Reagan-esque. It was great stuff, Greg. It was the right pitch. It was the right understanding, the right empathy. Unfortunately, he also tweeted. So what did the media cover? They didn't cover this great speech that talked about the kinds of justice, the kinds of police reform, the kinds of things that we need to do in America. They covered the tweet.
Yeah.
Our colleagues in the so-called mainstream media are out to get this president, and they don't care if the country gets torn down in the process. That, to me, is tragic. And it scares me about my youngsters. These kids ought to grow up knowing what this country has been through. The book that I just shamelessly self-promoted. Right? In this book, there's a pandemic. It's true. The American Revolution almost stopped dead in its tracks because of a pandemic. And, of course, then it was smallpox. Today it's COVID-19. The idea that the country can't survive these kinds of things without the kinds of restrictions on our constitutional limits, our constitutional rights, theoretically, First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment, Fourth, Fifth, all of those amendments, to include all the way up to the 13th and 14th, are at risk because of what the left is doing in our media and out there on the streets, where something is burned almost every night and some police officer is threatened almost every single day. It's wrong. And we need to call it for what it is. Wrong.
It is wrong. We only have, unfortunately, about 90 seconds left. I want to ask you, though, what is your level of optimism right now? I mean, when you got back from Vietnam, the country was torn. There were riots much larger, at least from my perspective, larger back in the late 60s and early 70s than what we're seeing right now. We got through that. But I hear from some people who were alive back then that this actually feels worse. What do you think?
Well, it feels worse to them because they're not winning quite as fast as they want. And what you're looking at is a country where the guys were burning their draft cards when my brother and I went off to Vietnam in 1968 and 69. The same guys are now running the country. They're the mayors, they're the city councils. The mayor of your city, right, in New York City, was actually working with the Nicaraguan communists when we were trying to support the communist opponents.
Oh my God! And his name probably popped up when you were involved in those things. Oh, De Blasio, he's ridiculous.
Yep. Well,
I want everyone.
The answer is pray for our country. It truly is the right answer for where we are today.
Pray for our country, Colonel North. It's so great to see you. And by the way, folks, you may not know this about Colonel North, but boy, you always have great optimism, and you're a very hopeful, upbeat guy. And I think that might be one of the keys to your success. Am I wrong?
You're always on the upside. Semper Fi there, Marine. By the way, that's not a slogan for the Marine Corps.
Yep.
That's a way of life for you and me, buddy.
Totally. Colonel North, so glad that you were here, and so glad I finally got to meet you back in 2003 on the battlefield. You're the best, an American hero, everybody. We'll to be continued, okay? Come on again soon.
Will do. Semper
Fi. Semper Fi indeed. And by the way, everybody check out The Rifleman, available wherever books.
We say, and I ask you to say with us, lift up your voices in this great meeting in the heart of England, and to all the world a message: England lives and marches on.